Imagine you're like 16 years old, you're sitting in a gymnasium, and it smells faintly of floor wax and anxiety.
Oh, yeah, I remember that smell. Absolute nightmare.
Right. And the clock on the wall is just ticking down. Your potential college credits are completely on the line. So you turn the page of your AP history exam and you have just a few minutes to read, analyze, and write this massive comprehensive essay about a historical document.
And you're probably expecting, what, a letter from a president? A treaty?
Exactly. But instead, the document you have to analyze it's literally a drawing of a dusty, intricately carved wooden box.
A wooden box.
A box. And your mind just goes completely blank. Like, what are you even supposed to do with that?
It is the ultimate nightmare scenario for a student.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the absolute definition of diagnostic panic.
Yeah.
And if you try to just, stare at that image and figure it out on the fly, you are going to drown.
Oh, completely. Which is exactly why we're here.
Welcome to today's Deep Dive, everyone. We are thrilled you're joining us. Today, we're looking at a stack of sources that, on the surface, seem incredibly specific.
Yeah, we're pulling from an official AP history guide to document analysis, alongside transcripts from a triad of videos by the widely popular YouTube channel Heimler's History.
And these sources, they're ostensibly survival guides, right? Like, they're technically designed to help high school students pass these grueling exams, AP US History, AP World, European History.
Specifically tackling the dreaded DBQ, the document-based question.
Right. But the underlying mission of our deep dive today is actually much bigger than passing a standardized test. What we're really unpacking here is, well, it's the ultimate framework for how to quickly, accurately, and confidently decode any dense piece of information without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, because what's really fascinating here is the core theme running through all these materials. It's about critical thinking in a world of just absolute information overload.
Because to truly understand a document, and I mean, whether it's a 19th century treaty, a really confusing corporate memo you get at work, or just a heavily biased news article, you can't just passively consume it. You have to interrogate it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if I'm handed a totally new, complex, really text-heavy document, my natural human instinct is to just dive right in.
Well, of course. Everyone's is.
Since kindergarten, we're taught that reading is a linear top-to-bottom process. You see a wall of text, you start at the first sentence, and you read until you hit the bottom. It feels productive, it feels like you're doing the work.
But it's actually the most common trap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly why people get so overwhelmed. You want to understand the text, so you start parsing every single sentence, trying to memorize all the details as you go.
Which brings us to the first major rule from our Heimler sources. And I have to warn you, it sounds completely counterintuitive.
It really does.
The rule is, when you're handed a document, do not start by reading the document.
Yep. Stop reading.
Wait, that sounds like terrible advice. If I'm being graded on analyzing a piece of text, how can I possibly justify ignoring the text?
Because reading without a specific purpose is basically a recipe for getting lost.
Yeah.
As the sources point out, working historians do not just sit around reading random documents for funsies.
Right. They aren't just browsing.
Exactly. They don't just pick up a diary from 1842 and say, well, let's see what happens. A working historian always has a specific inquiry. They have this burning question in their mind, and they're interrogating the document solely to see if it can answer that exact question.
Let me try an analogy here. It's like if you wander into a massive warehouse-sized grocery store without a shopping list.
Oh, that's dangerous.
Right. And you just start walking up and down every single aisle looking at the items. You are going to end up lost in aisle 4.
You'd be staring at 15 different types of canned soup.
Completely forgetting why you even drove to the store in the first place.
That captures the feeling perfectly. Because if you read a historical document without a prompt, you're just wandering the aisles. Think about it. A single letter from a Civil War soldier could potentially answer 1,000 different questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Well, it could answer questions about military tactics or supply chain logistics or the psychological trauma of warfare, or even just like the weather patterns in Pennsylvania that week.
Oh, I see.
But you don't care about 999 of those questions. You only care about yours.
So for you, the listener, the practical application here is that you have to start with the end in mind. If you're taking an exam, the Heimler method says you read the prompt first and you physically mark it up.
Yeah, get your pen out.
You circle the main idea. You underline the specific historical thinking skill they're asking for. Like, are you looking for the causes of an event, or are you looking for the effects?
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, identifying that specific skill changes everything about how your brain processes the incoming information.
Oh,
Well, once you know you're strictly looking for, say, economic effects, your brain will automatically filter out all the irrelevant paragraphs about political philosophy or religious beliefs when you finally do read the text.
okay, so I have my grocery list. I know exactly what question I'm trying to answer. Now, surely the next logical step is to actually dive into the main text of the document.
You'd think so, but there's actually still one more hidden step. The sources emphasize a crucial mini-step that happens right before the main text begins. And it is apparently the most skipped step of all time.
And the skip step.
Yep, the source or the attribution.
Okay, wait, let's pause here. The attribution. You mean those tiny, usually italicized lines of text sitting quietly at the very top and bottom of the page?
Those exact ones.
Because honestly, my eyes just glaze right over those. It looks like boring administrative metadata, like published by so-and-so on this date. Who cares?
See, everyone skips it because it feels like legal boilerplate. But the sources reveal that this tiny block of text is actually a cheat code.
Cheat code.
Yeah. Depending on the document, that little line gives away the author, the year it was written, the broader context, and crucially, the tone.
Can you give an example of how that actually plays out in practice? Because I'm struggling to see how metadata is a cheat code.
Sure, let's look at a specific example from the AP guides involving a political cartoon. Let's say you're looking at this highly detailed, very chaotic drawing from the late 1800s. There are politicians depicted as octopuses, factories spewing smoke, people getting trampled.
Sounds like a mess.
It is. And if you just try to analyze the image literally, you might get incredibly confused about the artist's message. But the attribution at the bottom simply states that the cartoon was published in a magazine called Puck.
Oh, and if you've studied your Gilded Age history, you know that Puck was a famous satirical magazine.
Precisely. Just knowing that one single word satire does half the analytical work for you before you even look at the drawing.
What?
You instantly know that the realities portrayed in the image are going to be exaggerated, cynical, and highly critical of the establishment. You aren't trying to figure out if it's a literal representation anymore. You know it's a deliberate caricature.
That completely reframes the approach, and this actually loops us right back to that nightmare scenario I mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive. The ticking clock, the panic, and that weird drawing of the dusty wooden box.
Yes. Document 7 from the 2019 AP World History exam. It goes down in history as one of the most infamously confusing documents ever put in front of students.
Wait, they literally just gave panicked teenagers a black and white picture of a box. What are you even supposed to do with that? How do you write an analytical essay about a box?
That is exactly what thousands of students thought. Their minds went blank. They stared at the intricate carvings on this box, trying to divine some deep historical meaning from the visual art, and they wasted massive amounts of time.
Because they skipped the attribution.
Exactly. The ones who knew the framework didn't panic. They looked at the attribution.
What did it say?
Well, the prompt for the essay was asking how the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. And the tiny italicized text under the image of the box simply stated, box made in India for export to Portugal, circa 1550.
Box made in India for export to Portugal. That's it.
That is all you need. You combine that single sentence of attribution with the prompt. Without ever decoding the confusing artwork on the box itself, you can confidently write an argument.
So you would say something like, the Portuguese transformed Indian Ocean trade so significantly that local artisans in India were restructuring their markets to manufacture luxury goods primarily for export to European buyers.
Boom, perfect. The answer was hiding in the metadata the whole time. The image was almost a distraction.
It's crazy how often the actual text or image is a distraction.
It really is. The attribution is the anchor that keeps you from drifting into misinterpretation.
Okay, so the attribution saved us from panicking over the image. We know our question, we mined the metadata for cheat codes, and we finally read the document with our specific filter on. But once I actually find the information I need, how do I prove that to the grader?
Right, the execution phase.
Yeah, because my instinct is to just find the most important sentence in the document and copy it word for word into my essay. Let the experts speak for themselves, right?
Which brings us to a very strict, non-negotiable rule from the AP guides. The no quoting rule.
Wait, what?
You get 0 points for just quoting the document.
0 points. But quoting feels so safe. It feels authoritative. If the historical figure said it perfectly, why shouldn't I just use their exact words to prove my point?
Because of what quoting actually demonstrates to the person evaluating you.
Yeah.
Anybody can copy and paste a sentence. Quoting a document just proves that you possess the physical ability to transcribe text from one piece of paper to another.
Oh, I see.
It does not prove that you actually understand what that text means in the broader context of history.
So it's about forcing cognitive friction. You have to prove you processed it.
Exactly. The sources dictate that you must summarize the document's main point in 1 or 2 sentences, entirely in your own words. When you're forced to summarize, your brain can't just passively copy. It has to synthesize the logic, compress it, and output the core meaning.
Let's make this concrete. Walk me through what this looks like with a real historical text.
Okay, the guides use an example involving the Dutch imperial government in Java during the 19th century.
Sounds dense.
Oh, it is. Imagine you're reading this archaic text that says something like, "It is hereby decreed by the colonial administration that the indigenous peasantry of the Javanese territories must remit a portion of their labor, not to exceed 66 days per annum, to the cultivation of export crops, despite the pre-existing burdens of local subsistence farming."
Just listening to that makes my eyes glaze over. It's so wordy. Remit a portion of their labor per annum. Come on.
Right. If you quote that, you're just regurgitating 19th century bureaucratic jargon. But if you apply the summarizing rule, you strip away the noise. You translate it into a crisp sentence like, "The Dutch imperial government in Java demanded intensive labor for their export factories, which severely overloaded the local peasants who already had to farm for their own survival."
Boom. One sentence. You completely own the material, and now you can actually use it as a building block for your argument.
But summarizing is just the baseline. It proves you can read. The hardest part of document analysis, what the AP sources officially call sourcing, is where the real critical thinking happens. And it's where most people stumble.
Sourcing. What does that actually entail?
Sourcing means you have to go beyond the text and evaluate the document's historical situation, its intended audience, the author's purpose, or their point of view. You have to explain why the document says what it says.
Ah. And the sources point out that when students are asked to analyze an author's point of view, they almost always fall into the same trap, don't they?
They absolutely do.
They just point at the document and yell, "Bias." They write, "This author is biased because he's a British politician," and they think they've successfully analyzed the document.
Yes, the bias trap. It is such a weak argument because everyone has bias. Every document ever written has a point of view.
Right.
Just pointing out that a British politician might favor British policies does not explain the nuanced mechanism of how that bias actually shapes the specific words on the page. It's a very difficult analytical skill to master under a 10-minute time crunch.
So how do we bypass that trap?
Heimler's sources reveal a major hack for this exact problem. When in doubt, source for historical context. Instead of trying to psychoanalyze the author's personal biases, look at the timeline. It's the most intuitive approach for a learner to grasp because it relies on objective events.
I really want to expand on an analogy here because thinking about historical context reminds me of finding a leaked text message.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Let's say you see a screenshot of a text that just says, "I can't do this anymore. I'm totally exhausted and I want out." If you just read the explicit text, you have no idea what it actually means.
Because it lacks an anchor.
Exactly. But if you know the historical context, if the metadata tells you this text was sent on a Tuesday at 3:00 a.m. by someone who is in the middle of a brutal 80-hour work week at a toxic job, the meaning is clear. They're quitting.
Right.
But if the context is that it was sent by someone at mile 20 of their very first marathon, the implicit meaning changes entirely. The context is the secret decoder ring that gives the words their actual weight.
That's a great way to put it. This raises an important question, though. Once you've used that secret decoder ring, once you understand the context, how do you make sure the person reading your essay actually follows your logic?
Right, because you can't just assume they know what you're thinking.
Exactly. The AP guides note a very common, tragic mistake.
Yeah.
Students will beautifully explain the historical context, but they completely fail to connect it back to the specific argument they're trying to make. They just leave the facts hanging in the air.
So what does this all mean? How do we definitively connect those dots so the grader or our boss or our audience understands why we brought this up?
The sources provide an incredibly effective, almost formulaic approach. They offer specific sentence stems to physically force your brain to make that connection on the page.
Sentence stems.
Yeah. You start your thought by writing, "This document was written during," or in the context of, and you briefly explain the historical situation.
But I can't stop there.
Never stop there. Your very next sentence must begin with the phrase, "This shows," or "This demonstrates." That tiny phrase is the bridge. It forces you to connect the historical evidence directly to your overarching claim.
This demonstrates, wow, it's such a simple pivot, but I can see how it forces you out of summary mode and pushes you into pure analysis. You aren't just saying what happened, you're arguing why it proves your point.
It is the linguistic tool that translates a piece of text into actionable evidence.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because all of this theory is fascinating. We understand the mindset, we know to check the attribution, we know to summarize instead of quoting, and we know how to use sentence stems.
Mhm.
But if you're the learner listening right now, you probably want a practical, actionable system. How do you actually build this rapid-fire analytical muscle, especially when AP students are expected to process a stack of 7 complex documents in about 15 minutes before they even start writing?
It all comes down to a very specific, highly targeted feedback loop of mastery.
Yeah.
The Heimler transcripts lay out an exact, step-by-step method for practicing this at home.
Okay, lay it on us.
First, you go to Google. You want to search for pass-free response questions. Those are the FRQs, where you actually have to write out an essay instead of just bubbling in multiple choice answers.
So you type in AP World History past FRQ or US History or Euro.
Yes, and you want to click the official College Board link that takes you to the released exams from 2002 onward. Decades of free, highly vetted source material just sitting there, waiting to be used.
So I find a document-based question from, say, 2015. I print out the packet of documents, I sit down at my desk, and I write a short 1 or 2 sentence summary for each one, practicing that no quoting rule. I try to identify the context and what the document demonstrates.
Right.
But here's my pushback. If I'm studying alone, how do I know if my summaries are actually right? I could be confidently writing down terrible interpretations.
That is the genius of this specific practice loop. You do not just guess, and you do not have to wait a week for a teacher to grade it and hand it back. You go back to that same AP website, and you click on the link labeled Scoring Guidelines.
What's in the scoring guidelines?
It's the actual confidential packet that the official exam readers use to grade the essays. It is the ultimate answer key. You scroll down past the rubrics, and you will find an official chart that breaks down every single document.
I want to visualize this. Walk me through a hypothetical example of a student doing this loop.
Okay, let's say you read a dense petition from the British Indian Association in 1852. You struggle through the archaic language, and you write down a summary. You say, the association was happy with British rule, but wanted slightly lower taxes. That's your best guess.
Okay, then I pull up the scoring guidelines chart.
Yep. You find document 1, the British Indian Association. And right next to it is the official sanctioned interpretation. And you read it and it says, the association is actively petitioning the British Parliament to demand inclusion in the local legislative councils, demonstrating early organized political resistance to colonial monopolies.
Oh, wow. So my guess about lower taxes entirely missed the core theme of political resistance.
Exactly. And that moment of realization is where the learning happens.
Yeah.
You take your personal summary, you check it directly against the official interpretation, and you immediately see the gap in your analytical logic.
You realize, I missed the part where they demanded legislative seats because I didn't understand the attribution. That is such an incredibly tight feedback loop. You get immediate course correction. It rewires your pattern recognition on the spot.
And the sources advise that you just repeat this loop over and over. You analyze a document, you summarize it, you immediately check the rubric. You do it until your personal interpretations naturally start matching the official ones. Once you achieve accuracy, then you push for speed, aiming to get your processing time down to that 2-minute per document window.
It builds incredible mental agility. You're literally training your brain to instantly identify an author's purpose, their intended audience, and the historical constraints of a piece of information, all under pressure.
Which brings us to the broader application of everything we've discussed today. We spent this time outlining a masterclass for a high school history exam. But the reality is that this framework is a vital survival skill for the modern world.
Because we're essentially taking a DBQ exam every single day of our lives now, we are constantly flooded with an overwhelming stack of documents.
Every time you open your phone, you're hit with heavily biased news articles, carefully crafted corporate PR statements, algorithmic social media posts, and aggressive political rhetoric. If you consume that information linearly, if you just read it top to bottom and accept it at face value, you are going to be manipulated.
But if you can apply this historian's mindset, if you can pause, look for the attribution, ask who the intended audience actually is, and identify the underlying historical situation driving the author, You stop being a passive consumer. You stop letting the document dictate the terms of reality.
You become an active interrogator of the world around you. You learn to extract the truth you actually need, rather than the narrative the author wants to feed you. It's the fundamental difference between merely reading the news and actually understanding how the news is constructed.
It is incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, we want to leave you with a lingering thought to mull over. We've spent all this time talking about how to look backward, analyzing the specific biases, the panic, and the agendas of authors from hundreds of years ago.
Right. Recognizing that they were heavily shaped by the historical situations of their time.
They were bound by their context, just as we are bound by ours.
Exactly.
So here is the provocative question to take with you today. If every single historical document we study today was so heavily shaped by the specific, messy reality of its era, what are the historians of 100 or 200 years from now going to think of the digital documents we are leaving behind right now?
That is a fascinating thought experiment.
Uh,
When they pull up the archives of the 2020s, what are they going to see?
Will our fragmented, out-of-context text messages, our bizarre internet memes, and our fleeting emotional social media posts be meticulously analyzed for their historical situation? And without the full lived context of our daily lives, without the secret decoder ring of what it actually felt like to be alive today, how wildly might the future misinterpret the implicit meanings of the digital footprints we leave behind?
Yeah, good luck to them figuring out our memes.
Seriously, something to think about the next time you hit send. Thank you for joining us, and keep interrogating the world around you.